So everybody's freaking out with all this stuff that's going on right now with this virus, and everybody's claiming it's the end of the world, and they're trying to pull out all of these prophecies from the Bible to prove that this is the end, and how Bill Gates is trying to put microchips into us, that's going to be the mark of the beast, and that's it, and Jesus is coming back right now. Now, is that stuff true? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But there's one thing that I think we really need to keep in mind when it comes to reading biblical prophecies. And that is that we're not as good at interpreting prophecies as we think we are. I'll prove it to you. Luke chapter 24. So this is immediately after the resurrection, and Jesus appears to a couple of people walking on the road on their way to the city of Emmaus. So starting in chapter 24, verse 25, and he, being Jesus, said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophecies have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ would suffer for the things to enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all of the scripture, the things concerning himself. And if we skip over to, in the same chapter, to verse 44, now Jesus has appeared to the rest of his disciples. And he says in verse 44, These are my words which I speak to you while I was with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. Right? So what we see is Jesus, after his resurrection, he spent basically the entire 40 days until he ascended back up into heaven, taking all of his followers through the Old Testament of the Bible and pointing out, that was about me, and 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 that was about me. So think about that. These men who had read these scriptures their entire lives, it was part of every Jewish boy's education, even the ones that didn't finish school would have read through all of that. They would have been familiar with it. And they lived with Jesus for 3 years, and they still missed it. Right? Which proves that we are not as good at interpreting scripture as we think we are. These men could not see it unfolding in front of their eyes. So what makes us think that we're going to be any better? When you look at the nature of apocryphal literature to begin with, right, it's pretty confusing, and I think intentionally. What we have are men in ancient times, right, first century and even before for the Old Testament, writing down visions of what's going to happen in the future. And the further out in the future, the more intentionally vague the visions that God gives them are. So kind of like if you were to try to describe your cell phone to somebody that lived in the year 1800 and do it in a poem, it's pretty difficult. And that's what we see with John recording the book of Revelation and all of the Old Testament prophets. That's basically what they were doing. They were trying to use the language of their time to describe things that had not happened yet in a way that their audience would be able to understand. So I think it's intentionally difficult. And every generation has tried to put themselves into those prophecies and has tried to show how those prophecies are referring to them. I mean, the first century Christians all thought that the Antichrist was going to be Nero. During the Reformation in the 1500s, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and all of the reformers swore that it was going to be the Pope. And then it was Napoleon Bonaparte. And then it was Adolf Hitler. And then during the Cold War in the 70s and 80s, everybody thought that the Antichrist was Mikhail Gorbachev. And literally every U.S. president has been accused of being the Antichrist. Right? We always try to make it about us. So is it possible that this is the end and that Jesus is coming back right now and that the mark of the beast is going to be a microchip? Well, maybe. I don't know. It might not be. I just think that we need to approach this with a little bit of humility and caution. Try not to make such definitive statements about things that have not happened yet. There's a little bit of room for disagreement. We're going to see how it lays out in the end. But we just need to be humble and kind to each other.